Welcome everybody to today's webinar, GDPR Readiness for Unstructured Data. Today my colleagues will be talking about how to embrace data protection and GDPR. So my name is Laura Stotesbury. I am the Head of Marketing here at Waterford Technologies, and I will be the moderator for today's session. So today's session will be 30 minutes in duration. In order to maximise our time today, we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar as time permits. So please ask your questions in the Q&A platform on your screen. So today's session is going to be recorded and will be shared with all those attending after the webinar. So I would now like to introduce you to today's speakers. Both are from Waterford Technologies and both experts in their respective fields. So today we have Gary White, our Data Protection Specialist, and James Stapleton, our Data Management Specialist. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Gary, who's going to kick off with today's agenda. Welcome, Gary.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. Okay, so welcome everybody, and today I'm going to bring you through some of the first few slides before I hand you over to my colleague James. And I'm just going to bring you through this rough agenda that we have here today and go through each point in a little bit more detail. So, number one, how are you affected by GDPR? GDPR is not a quick fix or a meeting of a deadline just from the 25th of May last year. GDPR it's about organizations' responsibilities to manage, maintain and protect data. If it's done right, GDPR can help organizations streamline processes, reduce costs and demonstrate a proactive and responsible image to their clients and staff. Done badly, and it's not only potential fines, but it's the potential reputational damage to your organization. So if you lose your reputation, it's obviously very difficult to get that back. Number two, the Wild West of data. So James will talk in more detail about unstructured data later, but according to the IDC, unstructured data accounts for approximately 80% of all data in an organization. Consider that for a moment. Just how much data is held in your organization? Potentially hundreds of terabytes, and if 80% of that data is unstructured, this essentially means that it's difficult to search, delete, manage or control. Number three, how to protect your data and reputation. So as I said before, the potential fines that are the issue for the organization, we all know that the potential fine of 20 million or 4%, the chances of this happening is probably quite low. And there's more than likely an element of fatigue in the marketplace about this. People are tired of hearing of it. What we should be more of a more immediate concern is, whilst the individual data protection authorities work out the bigger cases and start looking at the non-Google and Facebooks of the world, is the reputational damage to smaller organizations. So what would happen to your organization if they had a leak of sensitive or personal information, if staff, clients or suppliers felt that their data wasn't safe within your organization? Data is now the lifeblood of every organization, and with that, you either have trust or you have nothing. So number four, automation. So automation is key to any data protection policies, so you can concentrate on the day-to-day work that you have. Streamlining your processes helps reduce costs associated with subject access requests, FOI, e-discovery requests, and so on. Number five, cloud. Cloud is probably one of the hot topics at the moment, obviously besides GDPR. Organizations want to move to the cloud for financial reasons, but what's the impact to compliance and GDPR? So when cloud storage and applications are configured correctly, they reduce the costs and the demands on an organization and also make them more lean in their processes. So it's how you implement that and how they impact compliance and GDPR. Number six, do you need to keep all of your data and how to reduce costs? Licenses and backup are an example here, and James will cover this off in a little bit more detail. Basically, how you can go about protecting your organization, but at the same time also reduce your costs and how you can show in a little bit more detail how to save on Office 365 licenses. So Office 365 licenses for any organization is probably one of the biggest costs out there at the moment, and James will touch on how you can reduce that cost. Number 7, James is going to go through some case examples and talk through how organizations we've worked with in the past and how we help them meet their compliance whilst reducing costs. And finally, number 8, how we help. Hopefully, by the end of today's webinar, we'll have demonstrated how we can help. But please, as Laura said earlier, feel free to ask any questions during the Q&A session later, or get in contact with us at any point in time. So we're going to move on to a quick poll here now next. And basically, I'm going to explain the questions beforehand, and we'll wait for the feedback on them. So the first question here is, do you have the ability to conduct e-discovery, FOI, and SAR searches across your entire email and file data? So again, we're talking about unstructured data here. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give it a bit of time for this to populate, and then I'll come back to you and we'll see what the results are. Okay, so we're starting to see some results coming in now first. So just give it a moment. Okay, so what we've seen so far is for the yes, we're seeing 16. We're seeing 18%, which is obviously great news, that you feel you can meet the demands. For no, we're seeing 34%. This is a fairly typical response from what we would see in the marketplace. And finally, unsure. Unsure is 48%. This rings very true. We see this every day where companies really just don't know, can they manage, search, control, locate data in unstructured database repositories? Basically, they don't tend to know until it's too late. Until a subject access request lands on their desk, that's when they find out that they can't search unstructured data. So the second question, can you refine and narrow the scope of your searches? So I suppose the purpose of this question is, can you really refine down the amount of information you need to respond? So again, we're talking about unstructured data here. This is not CRM or payroll systems like that. But can you break down a request by an individual, by a group of individuals, by time period, by an attachment? Was it an email? Was it a file? Was it a specific word? Was it a group of words? Did it contain banking information, addresses, PII, so on and so forth? Basically, all of this is so that you can respond to a search, review, and export the data in the minimum impact to your organization. So again, guys, think about this. It's not just the subject access request or the FOI, it's the amount of staff that are needed to respond to those requests and how much time is taken up by that. Okay, so again, we're going to go through this poll and I'll just wait for some of the results to come back in. So, okay, we're seeing quite a low number here on the yes. We're seeing a number of 8%. This tends to happen when we give that amount of specificity at the start. When we're talking about unstructured data and how you actually go out and find that specific pieces of information, it sometimes changes the responses. So no, we're seeing 53%. It's actually a little bit low and shows the difference between organizations that have had to respond to DSAR and FOI and those who have been fortunate enough not to have to do that yet. And unsure, we're coming in at 39%. Okay, so this is what we do see a lot. Organizations are unsure as to whether they have solutions in place. And in truth, they probably haven't considered unstructured data before. And they often then just simply think that the IT department has the solutions in place to do this. So if you're not from an IT department, go and ask them today after today's webinars. If you are, please explain to your compliance teams that what search, locating and reviewing data in unstructured data actually means. And please tell them if you don't have a solution in place, because I think there is a misconception that IT can handle this and that they have the solutions in place. So we'll just move on to the next screen now. So we're going to talk about the challenges of GDPR as we see, these are some of the more popular topics we come across. So one of the most interesting stats that has come out recently from a survey in the UK is 82% of all UK respondents claim that they would boycott a company that demonstrated that they have no regard for protecting customers' data. So again, we're reverting back here to reputational damage. It's not just about fines here. It's what would happen if the wider public, your staff, your clients, or your suppliers were under the impression or seen that you could not protect their data. Basically, you've lost all credibility and you've lost reputational damage. From a marketing point of view, from a sales point of view, from every point of view of the business, that is just hugely detrimental. The second part we're going to move on to here is 1 terabyte of unstructured data equals 9 months. So what does that mean? James, again, will touch on this in a bit more detail, but basically what it's saying is the sheer scale and time required for searching unstructured data is estimated at approximately 9 months per 1 terabyte. Again, speak to your IT teams, have a look at your organization. How much data do you have? You could have hundreds of terabytes there. And when you have to do that search, there's no point finding out then that it's going to take you 25 years to find through that data. The next point, 2/3 of organizations aren't prepared. So what do we mean by that? It's not just that you've had a breach in most cases, it's what has been lost. So I'll give you an example. Bank of Ireland here in Ireland recently had a breach. They contacted the DPC in Ireland, and because they could show that no one was personally identified, and although the information was financial, the DPC ruled that they did not have to contact the individual people concerned. Okay, so what does that mean? It's gone from massive reputational damage to a small bad data management practice, because they could understand the data that was lost very, very quickly. So basically what happened is a member of staff sent an email with a file attached that contains the salary and pension details of individuals within the organization. Because they could find out exactly what information was sent and show that no individual was identified, the DPC ruled that they did not have to contact every single person on that. They could also show how the emails were sent and how many people received those emails. We're going to move on then to reputational damage. So look, as we said earlier, there's a little bit of fatigue out in the market about the 20 million and the 4%. And with the exception of the CNIL in France's fine of 50 million to Google, these figures are very unlikely for standard organizations. But what we are starting to see more and more is the issue of smaller fines. So fines ranging from anywhere from 20k to 100k. We're also seeing that the different DPAs and the different regional organizations are basically reducing the fines if an organization can demonstrate that they've been proactive in their measures, even if they have an issue. So if they've made best practice, if they've implemented solutions, and they still had an issue that was a data protection breach or a compliance breach, because they made good measures in the first place, they're reducing the fine. The right to be forgotten. So obviously the right to be forgotten is a core principle and probably one of the most difficult. So James again will show you how we can make this a more simplified process, a more automated process. So not only go out and search, locate, find and export that data to the individual, but how you can go in then and delete and remove that data. Finally, in this page, we are looking at the second year. So policy needs to turn into practice. So again, if any of you are compliance professionals on the call today, you'll understand this better than anybody. Basically, as I said at the very beginning, GDPR is not a tick box exercise. GDPR is a proactive measure in how you implement strategies in your organization. Done well, they can actually streamline your processes and make your organization a more profitable organization. Done badly, and well, the implications speak for themselves between fines and reputation, as we've mentioned. What does GDPR require of you? A lot, basically. I suppose what I'm going to focus on here is 4 main core parts. And as you can see underneath that, we've broken these down into 4 parts, and we've attached certain articles to them, which you're all familiar with. So the first is proper management. So can you demonstrate that you've taken reasonable technological measures to protect and manage data in your organization? So again, that proactive approach that you're going out, managing and mining the data under your responsibility. Prudent storage. So I suppose this is really the what, the where, and the why of GDPR. So if you have it, what is it, where is it, and why do you have it? Then you also have to look at what am I saying in my privacy policy, and am I actually adhering to what I say in my privacy policy? So if I say I retain data for X amount of years, am I destroying that data? Am I destroying all of that data? Again, it's very easy to do that in structured databases, unstructured databases, which is what we're concentrating on. It's extremely difficult to do that without a solution in place. Breach. So breach is one of the hot topics of GDPR. And as I said, most of you will have a breach notification system in place. If you don't, you should have one, and it's something you need to look at. But what we're going to talk about today is not just about that you've had a breach, it's what you've lost. So you have to understand quickly, because you have that 72 hours to respond and notify the relevant authority in your country, but you need to be able to respond and tell them exactly what you've lost. Rights, so the individual's rights. The difficult part of GDPR is basically when a DSAR or subject access request lands on your desk, how do you respond? Who is responsible? Can you do it in 30 days? And based on the poll information we've just seen there a couple of slides ago, at very best, we're unsure. So compliance often think IT have it controlled, IT often think compliance have it controlled. If nothing else comes out of today's webinar, maybe you can just start that conversation. Next slide. So why you need help with unstructured data. So email and file, as we've spoken about earlier, is unstructured data. Email and file are probably the two primary locations for unstructured data. So just consider for a moment how much sensitive information is sent and received via email. Now consider how long your organization has had email. It can basically run into tens or hundreds of millions of emails. And although recent information is easy enough to find, older information, content, attachments, date ranges, keywords, they're all extremely difficult and very, very costly exercise to have to do. Location. So we come back to this magic 80% again. As it's so large and often so old, it is naturally over time had a sprawl across multiple locations. So end users, by their very nature, are going to save it on desktops, in PSTs, in email folders, in archive folders, and files are often even worse. Just consider, again, for a moment, the number of files that are created each day. They're saved in multiple locations, and they contain everything about your organization, everything from client information to business critical plans to strategy developments to product developments, but they're sprawled across your organization and you do not have visibility of them without a technological solution. Structure. So again, from a compliance point of view, which is what I care about, I suppose, is if you take nothing else out of today, take this and please think about this. What email platform do you use? Where are all your files? Can you search it? Can the IT department search it? Should non-compliance people be reviewing and searching for sensitive information? So think about that for a second. Are you assigning a very, very sensitive task that contains sensitive information about sensitive individuals and handing it over to somebody who maybe doesn't care about it as much as you do? One of the other things I'd ask you to ask today as well is, because it's one of the most common reactions I hear is, oh, we have Office 365, so we're covered. But I'm just going to ask this question, are you? So Office 365 is probably the most used email platform in the world, and it's a fantastic solution. It's a fantastic communication solution, but it's not a storage solution and it's not a content searching solution. Giving an idea about that is, if you need to run the types of queries or the types of information you need for FOI or DSAR, in Office 365, you need to specifically write query type searches. So this is including with their compliance toolset. What that basically means is you have to have an element of training in how to write query type searches. Your searches are then limited and they're also extremely complex and time consuming. So again, you're not covered. You may have a solution. Do you understand it? Who can use it? How big is the scope? What do I have to cover when I have an FOI or a DSAR? Time. As I said, it's out there. The data is out there. We know it's out there. But who has it? Do I know about it? Can I search it? Who has access to it? And can I hold it for compliance teams to export it? These are the couple of the core questions you guys need to take from today's session. And as I said, if you take nothing out of it, is just ask those questions internally within your organization. Can we do this if we need to do it? Hopefully you will never have to do it, but if you do, can we do it? Okay, I'm going to now hand you over to James. James will bring you through some of the features of our solutions that will show you how you can help with some of the questions I've raised here earlier. I will be available later in the Q&A session if you have any questions, and I'd just like to say thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gary. Hi everyone, my name is James Stapleton. I'm a data management specialist at Waterford Technologies. So Gary has touched on the requirements that GDPR imposes on organizations and the kinds of challenges that this creates when it comes to unstructured data. So what I'm going to focus on now is looking at some of the key actions that companies can take to deal with these type of challenges, as well as look at a practical example of where we have helped one of our clients in this regard. So if we break it down a bit further, Waterford Technologies specialise in helping organisations to manage their unstructured data, that being email and file data, from a GDPR point of view. So as Gary alluded to earlier, this type of data is where organisations tend to have the most difficulties when it comes to finding personal identifiable information, as there is no database behind it. So as an example, if a company was to receive a data subject access request in the morning, that will start off a workflow internally whereby you will need to find requested information across your systems. So searching for PII information across structured databases such as HR systems or CRMs, ERPs, etc. may not be a whole lot of fun. However, you will find the information as there are databases in these systems. So they are essentially searchable. However, if you need to go and find this information across your unstructured data, that is where it can get messy and time consuming. As per one of our earlier slides, Gartner states that it takes 9 months to eyeball 1 terabyte of file data. So because this type of data can make up a significant volume of your overall amount that an organization holds, there needs to be an easier way. So the GDPR Coalition highlighted this fact last year when they stated that the wild west of GDPR is unstructured data. So this is where we can help. Our years of experience in this area has allowed us to focus on what are the key aspects or questions that organizations need to ask themselves when it comes to unstructured data. And typically when we work with companies on these type of projects, the kinds of questions that we ask are, can you locate your data? Can you manage your data? Can you monitor it? Can you protect it? Do you have the ability to minimize it? And can you carry out a data subject access request? So let's break these questions down a bit further. So if you get a subject access request, be it from a past employee or customer, the clock starts ticking down for you to be able to present this information back in a timely manner. So ultimately, you want to mimic what that database structure gives you, a portal to interrogate and produce that information in a format that you can manipulate. And this is very difficult to do natively in email and file. Our portal will allow you to do this by enabling you to search any historical emails sent or received, regardless of whether or not that email was deleted, and to present it in a format that you can manage. You can also rapidly search across your file data regardless of how many servers there are or where they are geographically located, and bring back the specific information requested. So the key point here is that most organizations will not have the time or resources to manually search for information to fulfill these requests. And that's leaving aside the pressure that would be created if there were multiple requests at the same time, which could potentially happen if there was any negative press about your organization. So, moving on, if we look at locate first, no matter how big or small you are as an organization, the first thing that you need to be able to do with confidence is know the location of any personal data. If you don't have the ability to find this information, then you are hitting a roadblock straight away. So ask yourself the question, if someone submitted a DSAR request requesting specific information, can you locate that information across all your data sets? Manage. For the data that you hold in your organization, you need to ensure that you have an easy way to manage this insofar as being able to find, present, and then take particular actions. These actions might include the ability to delete information if requested, applying legal hold in the event of an investigation or court case, implementing retention policies, or the ability to present information to a data subject in an appropriate format. All of this helps demonstrate that you are managing and conforming to GDPR requirements. So monitor. So as well as managing, you also need to monitor on an ongoing basis that you are not holding private data unnecessarily and that you can track, manage, and remove this information. We can provide you the ability to create specific plans against your email platform to monitor certain types of information that can then be flagged to appropriate personnel such as compliance or HR to take certain actions. Protect. Can you demonstrate that you have the appropriate data protection and best practice in place for your data? Can you demonstrate that data is encrypted and that only personnel with the appropriate privileges have access to the data? We provide the ability to encrypt data in transit and at rest and provide a full audit trail of any actions on that data. To minimize. Minimize is one of the key parts of GDPR. You need to be able to justify why you're holding on to personal data. Applying retention policies is obviously an important part of this as the right to be forgotten. However, in order to be able to minimize your data, you need to have the ability to firstly locate and interrogate the data that you have to give you the visibility required to take the actions to reduce your data footprint. Again, this is particularly difficult to do with unstructured data. However, we provide a tool set to reduce the time and complexity involved in this type of activity. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a vast experience in this area and have many customers across both public and private sector that use our solutions as part of their GDPR strategy. With that in mind, it might be useful if we look at a practical example of a customer we worked with last year. This particular customer based in Dublin is in the manufacturing sector, and the issues that they came to us about were they were looking to basically migrate from an on-premise email platform to Office 365. And they also had a lot of file data across multiple servers that they had very little visibility over. So a lot of their initial concerns revolved around the cost, the complexity, and the timeframes for such a project. And they wanted to see if we could help with that. So when we sat down with them to discuss this further, I suppose some of the areas that were highlighted were that legal investigations were on the rise, and this was something that was of a big concern to them. They also felt that they did not have proper process in place or the appropriate resources in place to manage a DSAR, and they wanted to have a system in place that would perform searches in a timely manner, in particular across their unstructured data. They were also conscious that they had data going back many years in their file system, which was continuing to grow, and although they suspected that much of this was probably redundant data, they had no visibility over what was important versus what was not important. As a result, costs were increasing as all this data had to be managed and backed up. Another cost concern that had revolved around migrating to Office 365. They did not want to have to bring over all their legacy redundant data. They were also concerned about the complexity of managing compliance with Office 365, and they wanted to explore using us as their GDPR compliant tool set to manage their unstructured data. So the overall solution involves the following. What we were able to do, we carried out a full in-depth analysis of their file servers to give the visibility required to understand the makeup of their data. They were then able to identify 20% of their data that could be deleted straight away as it had no business value. So effectively 2 terabytes of data removed within 24 hours, which had an immediate impact. Of the remaining data, we then set up a policy to archive cold data to less expensive storage, fully encrypted. This then left them with 4 terabytes of active data, down from 10 terabytes. We also implemented content indexing across all the data on their file servers, enabling their DPO to granularly search their data in the event of a DSAR. On the email side, we ingested all their mailbox content into GDPR-ready repository that could then be searched for future investigations. And this also reduced the time required for the migration itself, as they were only bringing over active mailboxes to Office 365. So in summary, the outcomes they achieved were that file footprint was greatly reduced, which in turn reduced the cost of managing the data. They now had a DSAR availability across their email and file data. Office 365 only had the relevant mailboxes, and they then implemented a retention policy of 2 years on their email platform, as ultimately it's a communication platform, Gary mentioned earlier, not a storage location. And they used our MailMeter solution then as their GDPR repository going forward. So I hope you found this session useful and that you have a good understanding of the types of challenges that we can help with through our software, as well as the in-house expertise that we have. Thanks for taking the time to join today, and now I'm going to hand you back to Laura.
Thanks, James, and thanks to Gary as well. So I'm very conscious that we've just come up to the half hour. I'd also just say a quick apology. There was a few hands raised there, and the poll just didn't seem to be working with a few people. So if you can hang on, we've just 3 or 4 questions that we'd like to go through. If any of you have asked questions and we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we email out the answers straight after. So just to start with, there's a question here from Mark. Is email not structured data? I have email folders and built-in archives. So James and Gary would like to take that.
Yeah, so I'll take that here, James. Yeah, so no, it's not structured data. I mean, just to go back a step, I suppose structured data itself is information, usually text files displayed in titled columns and rows, which can then be easily ordered and processed. So, while email holds information such as time sent, subject, sender, the content of the email is not easily broken down and categorized as would be normal with something in a database. So, with a solution like ours, we give you the ability to, search, retrieve, export, delete, and proactively manage your email data, including the PII across all mailboxes. So yeah, in essence, it's definitely not structured data.
Okay, thanks, James. And here's a question from Louise. You mentioned at the start that you could save money on our Office 365 licenses. How does this work? Do I not need an Office 365 license? I think, Gary, this is probably your area.
Yeah, so Office 365 offers multiple variations of licenses, so E1, E3, E5, and on top of that, they add add-ons into it, which allows you to have compliance. And one of the things we see in every organization is E3 and E5 licenses are very expensive. If you look at a big organization with 300 or 400 staff, that becomes extremely costly very quickly. So what organizations can and should do is select the right license in Office 365 for their user. So what I mean by that is, if you have mobile staff, by all means, put them on E3 or E5. If you have C-level staff, the same. But if you have entry-level staff or remote staff that don't need to have those facilities, there's absolutely no need to have them on E3 and E5. And there's certainly no need to add the compliance toolset on top of that. MailMeter, our solution, would sit across all licenses within Office 365, regardless of their E1, E3, E5, and so on, and give you the single repository to be able to interrogate it for subject access requests, FOIs, all of the good things that James mentioned earlier. That way, you basically pay for the right license for your organization, and for a small cost, you would have MailMeter sitting across the top to cover all of your compliance needs around email.
Okay, thanks. And I think Shay asked the question, we use different Office 365 licenses for different users. Does MailMeter work with all Office 365 licenses? So I think you've just answered that question.
Yeah, that's exactly again. So it doesn't matter what license your organization use, we work with all of them, Pro, whatever it may be. And even some organizations have a split between on-premise license and Office 365 license. We work with all of them. So we cover all bases there for your organization.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So I'm just going to squash in one last question. So this comes in from Killian. How long would a SAR search take for a person in email? So I'm presuming that's with our product.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, I mean, yeah, look, you're essentially talking minutes as opposed to days. So what we'll give you is the ability to rapidly search across, the body, subject, the attachment name, attachment contents, across specific date ranges so that you can granularly find what you're looking for. So, we've you can do that then using a full search syntax. So, things such as a full Boolean search where you can narrow down and do searches using words like and, or, near, like, sounds like, etc. So, in a sense, it's very, very rapid and quick in the sense of how you can search for the information that you're looking for, so that you can save the time and ensure that you get that information across to your data subjects in time.
Great. So I think we'll just leave it there. We've just gone 6 minutes over. Apologies for that. Thank you to everybody who joined our webinar today. As I mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be sent out after. If you want to contact Gary or James or myself, please contact us at sales@waterfordtechnologies.com or visit our website, and the phone numbers are on the screen at present as well. We'll be sending an email that you can follow up with too. So thanks again. Thanks, Gary and James, and I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.